The sprawling estate stood like a monument to excess, its manicured lawns stretching towards a horizon, hidden by ancient trees. A world unto itself. Inside, sunlight poured through stained glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air of rooms so vast they felt like empty ballrooms. This was a place of quiet opulence, where every surface gleamed and the air carried the faint, clean scent of polish and expensive flowers. But beneath the polished veneer lay a stark division, a chasm wider than the estate itself. Here lived Clara, daughter of the master, draped in silks and lace, her laughter echoing freely through the grand halls. And here, too, lived Anya, the daughter of the head maid, her world confined to the back corridors and service stairs, her clothes simple, her presence meant to be unseen. The injustice of it all hung heavy, a silent weight Anya carried, watching from the periphery. This was the beginning, the quiet prelude to a storm of resentment and the yearning for a different life, a fairer existence. How does one bridge such a divide? Can innocence survive in the shadow of such privilege? Follow this journey of struggle and resilience. Like and subscribe to uncover the path to justice in a world built on inequality. Anya, no older than 7, sat on a worn stool in the hushed main hallway, waiting while her mother finished dusting a table that shone like a mirror. The air felt thick with the scent of the grand house, so different from the small, perpetually damp room she shared with her mother above the kitchen. Her fingers traced the rough weave of her simple cotton dress, a stark contrast to the shimmering fabric she saw on the ladies of the house. Suddenly, a whirlwind of silk and giggles burst into the hallway. It was Clara, the master's daughter, a year younger but radiating an effortless confidence. Clara stopped abruptly, her bright eyes fixing on Anya. There was no malice yet, not overtly, but something else, a detached curiosity, like observing a strange, small creature.
"Who are you?"
Clara asked, her voice clear and bright, holding a doll dressed in miniature finery that mirrored her own. Anya's heart fluttered, a mix of fear and a strange, hopeful flicker. No one of Clara's standing usually spoke to her.
"I'm Anya. My mother, she works here."
Her voice was barely a whisper, small and hesitant. Clara stepped closer, her eyes scanning Anya from head to toe. She reached out a tentative finger, touching the rough fabric of Anya's sleeve, then recoiled slightly, a faint frown creasing her brow. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes, a clear delineation of worlds, a subtle disgust at the perceived difference.
"Oh, you live here? But not really, do you?"
The worn wooden floorboards creaked under Anya's carefully mended shoes as she hesitated at the edge of the circle. Laughter rippled from the group, a sound like scattered glass that seemed to mock her approach. This place, supposedly a haven of learning, had quickly become a stage for a different kind of lesson entirely. One in subtle, cutting cruelty. Clara stood at the center of the group, her bright dress a stark contrast to Anya's faded tunic. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, met Anya's for a fleeting second before a practiced smile spread across her lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that promised amusement at someone else's expense. Anya felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She simply wanted to share her idea for the class project, to belong for just a moment. She stepped closer, offering a tentative smile. Laughter died down, by an expectant silence, heavy with unseen judgment.
Oh, look who it is! Come to join us, Anya! Or did you just wander in from well, you know?
The unspoken end of the sentence hung in the air like stale perfume. The fields, the village, the place where people like her came from. A wave of heat rushed up Anya's neck, stinging her eyes. Confusion warred with a deep, sudden ache. She didn't understand. Why couldn't things just be simple? Why did her home, her background, feel like a mark of shame here? She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The air suddenly felt thick, suffocatingly heavy with the weight of their stares. She could smell the faint, clean scent of Clara's expensive soap, a smell that felt alien and superior next to the familiar earthiness that clung stubbornly to her own clothes. A scent she had never noticed until now. Days turned into weeks, each one bringing a fresh, carefully orchestrated slight. Clara seemed to possess an uncanny ability to find the most vulnerable point and press down with exquisite precision. During lunch, Anya sat alone, the simple bread and cheese her mother had packed suddenly feeling meager and embarrassing compared to the elaborate meals others shared. The whispers started softly, then grew bolder, carried on the wind like dandelion seeds, landing and taking root in fertile ground.
Did you see her work? It's primitive, not exactly what we're used to here.
The words, though spoken in a low voice meant for others, carried clearly across the quiet room, hitting Anya like small, sharp stones. She flinched, her hand tightening around her worn pencil. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the words in her book. It wasn't just Clara now. Others were starting to echo the sentiment, their initial hesitation replaced by the easy cruelty that comes from following a leader. Anya felt the icy sting of isolation settle deep in her bones. She was an outsider, marked by her origins, unable to cross the invisible barrier Clara had erected. The power imbalance was crushing. Clara held the keys to acceptance, to belonging, and she wielded that power like a weapon. Anya felt small, helpless, utterly alone in a world that suddenly seemed determined to remind her she didn't truly belong. The seed of cruelty had been planted, and in the fertile ground of exclusion and prejudice, it was beginning to take root. She couldn't stay confused and hurt forever. Something inside her felt the first stirrings of a different kind of feeling, a quiet resolve born of pain. The vast rooms of the mansion, once merely intimidating in their emptiness, began to feel like stages for a crueler performance. The initial chill of neglect deepened into the frost of deliberate malice. It was no longer simply being ignored, left to wander the echoing halls alone, or eat meals in solitary silence under the indifferent gaze of the portraits. Now, the presence of others brought with it a tightening knot of dread. The whispers started subtly, just loud enough to be overheard around corners, or from behind half-closed doors. They spoke of Anya as if she were a curiosity, a mistake, something fragile and out of place that might shatter if nudged just right. Then came the objects. A misplaced slipper appearing just where she was about to step, almost causing a fall. A favorite book vanished from her small table, only to reappear days later with a page torn out. Small, seemingly innocent occurrences that, when strung together, formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. One afternoon, searching for a rare bloom in the overgrown conservatory she had come to cherish, she heard voices nearby, hidden by the thick, humid leaves. They were sharp, dripping with a sweet, false concern that curdled the air.
Oh, bless her heart, wandering among the weeds. Does she think she belongs here?
Another voice giggled, a brittle sound like snapping twigs.
Poor thing, so fragile. One wonders how long she'll last before she just wilts away, like those neglected orchids.
Anya froze amidst the damp soil and the heavy green scent of the plants. It was not just childish teasing. It was a cold, calculated dissection of her vulnerability. They saw her isolation, felt her uncertainty like a physical thing, and were deliberately amplifying it, using the grandeur of the mansion itself as an accomplice. Every creaking floorboard, every shadow, every distant peal of laughter now felt like a part of their intricate trap. The meals, though still solitary in practice, were now often accompanied by a subtle form of psychological pressure. A servant, seemingly innocent, might mention offhand, "Master always prefers the company of those stronger." Or perhaps a knowing look would pass between staff members just as she entered the dining room, a look she was certain was orchestrated, designed to make her feel observed and judged. The once welcome warmth of soup felt less comforting. The taste of bread turned slightly stale in her mouth as she swallowed down the rising tide of humiliation and fear. Anya saw the threads of their design now. It wasn't random. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of her spirit. They weren't just ignoring her. They were actively, gleefully, making her existence within these walls a constant, low-level torment. They were using the very environment she inhabited to amplify her isolation, turning its opulence into a mocking mirror of her own perceived inadequacy. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, heavy as the marble statues in the grand foyer. She understood the cruelty with a terrifying clarity, but the powerlessness was a suffocating shroud. Against such pervasive, insidious malice woven into the fabric of her daily life, what could one small, lonely girl possibly do? Anya watched Clara move through the bright, sterile hallways of the facility. Clara possessed a quiet authority, a casual air of belonging that Anya, despite her own mother's efforts, could never truly replicate. It was in the way staff deferred to her slightly, the respectful tilt of their heads, the readily offered smiles that felt different from the ones given to others. This subtle difference sent a chill down Anya's spine, a growing awareness that power here wasn't just about rules, but about presence, about who you were deemed to be. One afternoon, near the communal craft tables scattered with paper scraps and glue, Clara paused beside Anya. A few younger children and a busy aide were nearby. Clara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes.
Oh, Anya, still struggling with the basics? I thought you were meant to be improving.
Her voice was light, almost sympathetic, but the words landed like small, sharp stones. The aide glanced over, a flicker of something unreadable in their expression, before they quickly busied themselves again. Anya felt a hot blush creep up her neck. Her fingers fumbled with the felt shape she was trying to glue. The bright colors around her suddenly seemed dull. She felt small, exposed, utterly helpless under that deceptively kind gaze. Days turned into a week, and the incidents, though minor, accumulated like tiny bruises. Clara would make a quiet remark about Anya's clothes being slightly ill-fitting, or comment softly about how long it took her to understand simple instructions during a group activity. Always just loud enough for a few others to hear, always wrapped in a veneer of concern. Anya's stomach churned each time. She started anticipating the moments, her body tensing whenever Clara approached. The metallic taste of fear was becoming a familiar flavor in her mouth. She wanted to lash out, to shout that it wasn't fair, but the words lodged in her throat, choked by a sense of profound powerlessness. The hardest part was the performance she had to give when her mother visited. The aching knot in her chest would tighten, but she would plaster a smile on her face, her eyes wide and innocent.
Everything's fine, Mom.
She would say, her voice carefully light, praying her mother wouldn't see the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. She couldn't burden her mother with this, couldn't let her see how the edges of her world were being chipped away, how alone she felt in the face of this quiet, insidious cruelty. Hiding the pain was exhausting, a constant, silent battle fought behind a mask of normalcy, leaving her more isolated, more trapped, more desperately helpless than ever. Anya carried the weight of it like a physical burden, a stone lodged deep in her chest that made every breath ache. It was the secret, the constant, gnawing shame of being hunted, of being deemed less than, by those who saw her as an easy target. The polished floors of the grand mansion, reflecting the soft afternoon light, felt alien under her feet, too beautiful, too serene for the turmoil raging inside her small frame. She saw their faces sometimes, when she closed her eyes, heard the whispers like distant, venomous insects buzzing around her ears.
Look at her, trying to pretend.
Just take it was appalling conflict that was meaningful.
Does she really think she belongs?
The words weren't always spoken aloud in her current solitude, but they echoed within the chambers of her mind, replaying on an endless loop. Telling her mother felt impossible. Her mother already carried so many burdens, visible in the lines etched around her kind eyes, in the way her shoulders sometimes slumped with exhaustion. How could Anya add this ugly, festering wound to her load? It felt selfish, another demand on a strength that seemed finite. Shame was a suffocating blanket, trapping her in a silent cage of her own making. It told her that this was somehow her fault, that if she were just different, stronger, invisible maybe, it wouldn't be happening. The grandeur of the mansion offered little solace. Its vast halls and echoing rooms only amplified her sense of isolation. She would seek out the quietest corners, tucked away in unused libraries, smelling faintly of old paper and dust, or perched on window seats overlooking sprawling, empty gardens. Here, in the quiet, she could let the tears fall unseen. The coolness of the glass against her forehead was a small, fleeting comfort. She would trace the patterns of the leaded panes, losing herself for a few moments in the intricate designs, anything to escape the immediate ache. Sometimes she would draw furiously in a worn sketchpad, filling pages with dark, chaotic scribbles that were a silent scream. Other times, she simply curled into a ball, trying to make herself small, hoping that if she occupied less space, the pain might too. The mansion's silence, which others might find peaceful, felt heavy to Anya, a constant reminder of the secret she held captive within her own heart. The shame was a shadow that followed her, lurking in the periphery, a constant companion she longed desperately to shake but couldn't. It leached the color from the world, making even the most vibrant tapestries and ornate furnishings seem muted and distant. This solitary struggle was a lonely, exhausting battle, fought in the quiet confines of her soul, leaving her drained and vulnerable, trapped between the world that hurt her and the fear of revealing the truth to the one person who might be able to help. The silence of the house held her captive just as surely as her own fear. Anya carefully smoothed the final brushstroke on her canvas. It was a scene from her grandmother's garden, a place steeped in quiet comfort and precious memories. The oil paints, still slightly wet, shimmered under the gentle light from the window, smelling faintly of linseed oil and effort. This painting was more than just art. It was a piece of her heart laid bare, a sanctuary she could return to whenever the world felt too harsh. A soft sigh of contentment escaped her lips. The door creaked open, and a shadow fell across the floor. Clara stood there, a smile that didn't reach her eyes playing on her lips. There was a new glint in those eyes, something sharper, more deliberate than before. Anya's initial sense of peace evaporated, replaced by a cold knot forming in her stomach. She felt vulnerable, exposed. The air seemed to thicken, carrying a scent of something metallic and unpleasant, perhaps just the fear rising within her. Without a word, Clara walked slowly towards the easel. Anya watched, paralyzed by a growing sense of dread. It wasn't just casual meanness anymore. This felt different, focused, chillingly intentional. Clara reached out a hand, not to touch the painting, but to grab the palette knife lying nearby. The cool metal glinted as she hefted it. Anya's breath hitched. Time seemed to slow as Clara brought the sharp edge down onto the canvas, dragging it viciously through the wet paint, tearing the fabric with a sickening rip. The vibrant greens and soft pinks of the garden were instantly marred by jagged, ugly gashes. A splash of paint splattered onto the floor, looking like blood on wood. The sound of the tearing canvas echoed in the small room, a cruel counterpoint to the silence that followed. Clara lowered the knife, a look of detached satisfaction on her face.
Oh dear, clumsy me. Guess your little garden is ruined now, just like everything else you try to create.
Her voice was sugary sweet, laced with poison. Anya stared at the ruined painting, her sanctuary shattered before her eyes. It wasn't just the destruction of hours of work. It was the violation of something sacred, a brutal tearing of the delicate threads of trust she had foolishly allowed herself to feel, even marginally, towards Clara. Tears welled, hot and stinging, blurring the mangled image on the canvas. The acrid smell of turpentine suddenly felt overwhelming, making her dizzy. Her hands trembled, clenching into useless fists. This act was a clear message. Nowhere was safe. Nothing she valued was beyond reach. The world felt like it was closing in. The vibrant colors of her life slashed into monochrome despair. Yet through the haze of tears, a tiny spark ignited deep within her chest, a hardened resolve born from the ashes of her broken peace. A chilling premonition settled over Anya as she entered the assembly hall. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation, a strange mix of the usual school buzz and an undercurrent of something else, something coiled and waiting. She clutched the edges of her cardigan, the wool suddenly feeling scratchy and suffocating against her skin. Her eyes scanned the rows of faces, settling on one in particular. Across the room, Clara was watching her, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her lips like venom. A cold knot tightened in Anya's stomach. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like a small bird caught in the gaze of a predator. The large hall, usually a place of communal warmth, now felt cavernous and isolating. The principal stepped up to the podium, his voice booming across the speakers, but Anya barely heard him. Her focus was fixed on Clara, who subtly moved towards a side console near the stage, a place few students ever approached. A tremor ran through Anya's hands. She wanted to leave, to run from the escalating tension that filled the space, but her feet felt rooted to the spot, trapped by an invisible force. The murmur of voices around her seemed to grow louder, taking on a mocking edge. Then Clara reached the console. There was a click, and the large projection screen behind the stage flickered to life, displaying not the school crest as expected, but a series of images. Images taken long ago. Images Anya had kept buried deep. Images meant only for her eyes, or perhaps just one trusted confidant, cruelly twisted and presented out of context. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Then a wave of whispers that quickly erupted into open, disbelieving laughter. The sound crashed over Anya, a physical force that stole her breath and made the blood drain from her face. It was public. It was devastatingly personal, and it was meticulously orchestrated. Clara stood beside the screen, a triumphant smirk on her face, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Anya's world narrowed to a single, unbearable point of agony. The harsh stage lights seemed to bore into her soul, illuminating every raw nerve ending. The smell of polished floor wax and 100 different perfumes mixed into a sickening odor that made her feel nauseous. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. It was a humiliation so profound, so violating, it stripped away every layer of her defense, leaving her raw and exposed before the entire school. This was the peak of Clara's cruelty, the moment where Anya felt utterly broken, alone in a sea of hostile faces. This was the lowest point she could imagine, a ravine of despair into which she felt herself falling, with no hope of finding the bottom. Clara's final verbal thrust cut through the air, amplifying the agony.
Isn't that just pathetic? Honestly, some people.
The cold tile floor pressed against Anya's cheek, a sharp, unwelcome sensation amidst the numb throbbing in her head. The air tasted metallic, a bitter tang of tears and the lingering scent of whatever they had thrown. Sounds were muted, distant, like the world was happening behind thick glass, except for the frantic, echoing beat of her own heart and a persistent ringing in her ears. She lay there, curled into herself, a small, broken heap on the ground where they had left her. The weight of the recent attack was a physical appui, crushing the air from her lungs. Despair clawed at her throat, a raw, burning sensation. It wasn't just the physical pain. That would fade. It was the deep, soul-shattering ache that settled deep within her. The words they had spat, the cruel laughter that had echoed in her ears, replayed endlessly like a broken record in her mind. Every insult, every dismissive gesture, every time they had made her feel less than human, it all converged in this moment, solidifying into an unbearable truth. They were right. A small, poisonous voice whispered in the darkness of her thoughts, "You are worthless. You deserve this." She squeezed her eyes shut, but the images persisted. The sneering faces, the mocking eyes filled with pure, unadulterated malice. How could people be so cruel? More importantly, why did she always seem to be the target? Was there something fundamentally wrong with her? She sifted through her memories, searching for a reason, a fault, anything that could explain the relentless torment. Had she been too quiet, too different, too hopeful? It felt like every part of her identity, every fragile hope she had nurtured, had been systematically attacked and demolished. Looking inward felt like staring into an abyss. There was nothing solid left to grasp. Her confidence was shattered, her spirit broken into a million tiny pieces, scattered by the wind of their scorn. How could she ever face anyone again? How could she pretend to be okay when she felt like an empty shell? The future stretched before her, a bleak, unending landscape, devoid of light or hope. Every path forward seemed blocked by the towering shadow of what had just happened, and the crushing weight of her own perceived inadequacy. The thought of getting up, of continuing, felt utterly impossible. She was trapped at the absolute lowest point, lost in the suffocating darkness of her own despair, questioning if there was even a point in trying to find her way out. The world had shrunk to the size of her pain, and there seemed to be no exit. The air felt thick with the residue of humiliation, clinging to her skin like a second unwanted layer. Tears had streamed down Anya's face moments ago, hot trails cooling on her cheeks, leaving behind a sticky, unpleasant trace. She had huddled in a forgotten corner, the rough wood paneling pressing against her back, the faint scent of mildew filling her nostrils. Every nerve ending felt raw, exposed to the biting wind of cruelty that seemed to follow her everywhere. The harsh laughter still echoed in her ears, a cruel symphony that played on repeat, chipping away at the last fragments of her spirit. She felt small, insignificant, entirely breakable. The weight of the injustices pressed down, heavy and suffocating, threatening to extinguish the last flicker of hope she held on to. This felt like the end of everything she had endured, the culmination of relentless pressure, a point beyond which she could not see a future. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold draft seeping through the cracks, but from the sheer exhaustion of being a target, of constantly anticipating the next blow, the next cutting word. The silence that followed the torment wasn't peace. It was merely the empty space where the echoes died out, leaving the sting of what had happened. This was rock bottom, the floor of her despair, cold and unyielding beneath her. But as she sat there, shivering and defeated, a peculiar sensation began to stir within her. It was faint at first, like a distant ember glowing in the ashes. The absolute finality of her despair somehow scraped against a core of something harder, something she hadn't known she possessed. She remembered her mother, not in moments of grand triumph, but in quiet acts of resilience, standing a little taller after a setback, her gaze steady, her hands strong even when weary. A flicker of that quiet strength seemed to pass through the years, a silent echo reaching out to her. The rough wood against her back no longer felt like a wall trapping her, but a solid surface to push against. The scent of mildew was still there, but it no longer seemed to represent her fate. It was just a smell. A warmth, small but persistent, began to spread from her chest. It wasn't the warmth of comfort, but the heat of a burgeoning fire. The sound of her own ragged breathing filled her ears, but beneath it, she heard something new. A low, steady thrumming, the sound of her own heartbeat, refusing to falter. This wasn't about fighting back physically. Not yet. This was deeper. A fundamental recalibration of her soul. She saw, with startling clarity, that remaining in this corner, letting the despair consume her, was giving them exactly what they wanted. It was an acceptance of defeat, a surrender of her very self. And in that moment of absolute clarity, the ember ignited. It flared into a fierce, burning coal within her, solid and undeniable. She could not, would not, remain a victim. The choice felt sharp, distinct, cutting through the fog of misery. She would rise. She had to. The resolve solidified in her bones, lending a strange new rigidity to her posture. Her eyes, moments before clouded with tears, now held a different light. Not anger, not yet, but a hard, unwavering determination. The turning point had arrived, not with a shout, but with a quiet, internal roar. She pushed herself up from the floor. The sting of cheap soap on rough hands was a constant reminder of Anya's new reality. Gone were the soft fabrics and cushioned ease. Her days now began before dawn, scrubbing floors or stacking shelves before heading to the library. The faint scent of dust and old paper a comforting contrast to the stale air of her low-paying jobs. Education was her shield, her weapon, her only clear path forward. She devoured textbooks, the dense paragraphs offering refuge from the gnawing anxiety about rent and food. Yet, her notorious family name clung to her like a shadow, a silent accusation that often preceded her. Applying for a tutoring position, a chance to earn slightly more while using her academic strengths, felt like a step up. The interviewer, Mr. Henderson, a man with sharp eyes behind thin spectacles, scanned her application, his gaze lingering on her surname. A coldness entered his tone, the temperature in the small, stuffy office seemingly dropping.
Anya Petrova, is it? That name rings a bell. Your family, well, they've been in the news quite a bit, not for good reasons.
His words were flat, devoid of warmth, carrying the weight of judgment she had come to dread. Anya felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach, the underdog status pressing down on her. She had anticipated this, but the directness still felt like a punch.
That was my family, sir. I am trying to make my own way through hard work and education.
Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to meet his dismissive stare.
Hard work? Your kind doesn't know the meaning of it. Inherited wealth is one thing, but cleaning up your family's mess seems like a lot of trouble. Are you sure you're reliable?
He leaned back, a faint, unpleasant smile playing on his lips, the fluorescent lights above casting a harsh glare on his condescending face. The injustice burned hot in her chest. This wasn't about her qualifications. It was about prejudice, guilt by association. This was the conflict escalating, her past actively hindering her future. For a moment, the urge to shrink away, to accept defeat, was overwhelming. But then she saw, in her mind's eye, the path she refused to abandon, the hope she clung to. A newfound determination solidified her resolve.